Every time I've talked to people about their preferred way to play wargames, their answer is the same. Narrative style play is their favorite. And every time I see people ask for advice about how to get into a wargame, the advice from the community is the same. Go with the faction you think is the coolest. Don't worry about the meta. Be okay with losing games. Numbers change, the models won't. Now this is all good advice, great advice even. But if this is the prevailing wisdom of wargaming from wargamers, why isn't this the way we play? All the support and attention in the wargaming hobby seems to go straight towards the competitive scene, the area that most people playing will say is the less interesting way to engage with the gaming side of their hobby. So why does it get all the attention? Now it could be that matched play with the most updated competition rule sets is the easiest way to get a pickup game going between folks who don't know each other, and that's true. Narrative games require more creativity and agreement between the two players on what the experience is that they're trying to create on the tabletop, and the result is almost by definition unbalanced. Competitive rule sets are much simpler, and the rules of engagement are predetermined before you even walk in the door. Now I've played a few tournaments of Warhammer 40k, I've played pickup games at shops, and I've had a pretty good time with them. But the most fun I've had playing wargames is narrative games, where there's an emerging story playing out on the tabletop. This doesn't mean that narrative games can't be competitive either. You can play a narrative game with both players trying very hard to push their side to victory, but the victory itself tends to be less of the point. Let's step back a bit and set the context for this conversation. Wargames didn't used to be one player versus another player just battling it out. In what was essentially the original wargame Kriegspiel, there was an umpire that ran the game instead. They would set the conditions of the battle, the scenario, the troops and troop types. They would receive orders from the players on both sides in written messages and move the troops on the map according to those orders. They might even hold on to messages meant for allied players if the conditions of the battle might delay messages, or even give those messages to the enemy. The rules in the original version of the game weren't fully worked out, so the umpire would make judgment calls to respond to more creative orders in unique ways. The more modern approach to wargames is where the rules are very defined and there's an answer for any scenario that occurs. At least that's what the producers of those rules would like you to think. In reality, using unique pieces of terrain, loads of different books and resources that are constantly changing and impossible to keep a mental archive of, and various models representing different eras of the game that are technically still legal, result in all sorts of rules fog of war that require players to come up with on-the-fly rulings that they can agree to so that the game can just keep moving forward. This happens all the time in modern wargames, and it's not really a big problem for most people, because most people just shrug off an unusual scenario just to keep the game going. But then why are we pretending like these wargames are these super balanced competitive games that can or should be played in tournaments? In my stupid opinion, this is the worst possible development for wargames. Right now, wargames are running on modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Rules, and I think that they should be running on Duelist Kingdom rules.
I'm having him attack a card I put on the field myself. The moon!
No!
Now, Stone Soldier, destroy the moon!
Or at least Battle City. Players should be able to come up with cool ideas to try on the fly and deploy them into games right on the spot. There should be unexpected things that happen that screw up the plans of both players. There should be overarching campaigns that set the context for this battle, meaning that for one of the players, maybe victory just means slowing the opponent down. And the main thing that I think could improve wargames is bringing back the referee. Role-playing games understand that having a game master who can make on-the-fly rulings on player-driven creative problem-solving that feel like they make sense in the world being played seriously elevate them. And they could seriously elevate wargames from what they've been turning into over the years, which is board games. War games are at war with themselves, with their own identity. They don't want to be war games, they want to be board games. They want to have that refined and defined rule set that's easily replicated and defined, but the very nature of war games makes that simply an impossible thing for them to have. Most war games aren't on a grid. They use measuring tape to determine distances. That's messy. Yes, measuring tape itself is accurate, but most people will use it for a minute and then kind of eyeball where they put their troops. They aren't meant to be accurate to the centimeter with it, which means that it's not a perfectly defined and refined system. And it really was never meant to be that. RPGs like D&D spawned from Wargames because people wanted to expand on the narrative elements of their games. They wanted to bring the camera down and see the struggles of the individual. But when RPGs left wargaming, it feels like they took all the narrative juice with them. What's left in the world of wargames to me just feels like a pale imitation of the tight, refined mechanics of board games, just with way too much time, effort, and money put into them. You can get a strategic experience that is 1,000 times more fulfilling playing War of the Rings 2nd Edition for $80 with you and your best friend than you can if you spend $400 building and buying a Warhammer army just to show up to your local game store, get table turn 1, let it sit in your closet for a year, and then sell it on Facebook Marketplace. I'm not saying war games aren't fun, they're just not meant to be played in the way that companies making them seem to want you to play them or advertise that you should play them. So what would it look like to put a referee back into war games? Well, I think it works best when you have a group all involved in a game. Let's say you have a group of 4 or 5 friends that are into Star Wars Legion. Cool. Pick out a cool planet to fight over, make a big map, divide it into regions, generate cool resources and cities and landmarks, generate a table of conditions that could occur whenever armies meet at those locations, generate a table for world events that could happen on certain turns of the game, generate a bunch of factions that exist that you could earn the approval and ire of, then give all of that to a referee and let them use those resources to create unique scenarios for each of you to deal with. Maybe 2 players meet at an oil refinery owned by an off-world trading company. Now, one player secretly offers to pay the off-world trading company for the oil, while the other player plans to just take it by force. The off-world trading company takes the deal and sends in mercenaries to help the player that they made a deal with. Now, that other player is going to get bodied by the combined force. Sure, that fight itself was unfair, but the point isn't about making each fight fair. It's about making the whole game unique, fun, and interesting. You know for a fact that the player that got beaten in that last fight will now be thinking really hard about how to get that kind of advantage next time. That's the kind of gaming that really excites me, gets my imagination running. It's the kind of wargaming that I'm most interested in going forward. Now, I still think that there's a place in the world for matched play. It really is great for one-off pickup games, especially with people you don't know, but I think that this sort of play should be seen by the community as a nice beer and pretzels way to play the game, and certainly not the main way to play or something anybody should be obsessing over. My main argument here is that we as a community should be putting way more collective time and energy into ways to play the game that we all agree are more fun, and way less into metas and tournaments. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons for supporting the content I'm bringing to you. I'm Ben DeHart, and if you like this video, subscribe and come back and catch the next one. If you want to tell me about a narrative wargaming experience you've had, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. See ya.